Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for coming out tonight. I know that the next program you got Wes and Ken up here, so we got like a dueling of the duets here. So I'm glad we were first. So you're gonna have to work up to it, guys. So thank you for being here. I've done several programs for the Historical Society before. You've seen me working downstairs and at the museum for years, so I'm a familiar face. I want to also say that I want to say thank you for coming to a group we got here from Stanwood, and it's Warm Springs, is that right? Warm Beach, I'm sorry. I was down and I gave a program to them some weeks ago. And
Warm anything sounds pretty good.
and so they're up here too. So, we got some visitors tonight. So I'll do my best to make a good impression. So John and I'll give John a moment here to say something, but John and I were approached a little while ago about doing a Arcadia book on Bellingham. And the way we looked at it is we knew a lot about Mount Baker, and that was something that, a subject that kind of touches our heart. We're not experts on the mountain, but we hike it, we walk it, we watch it, we do all kinds of history-related things with Mount Baker, and that was our subject. So, and we are proud to present that Mount Baker is the first Arcadia book for Whatcom County, so we were very pleased to see that on the shelf, and it's just been a lot of fun. I'm going to let John say something, and then we'll start our program.
Sure, thanks, Todd. Yeah, I am editor and publisher of Adventures Northwest magazine, published locally here in Bellingham, and Arcadia approached me with the idea of a Bellingham book. I'd worked with Todd. Some of you may know Todd is a award-winning filmmaker. Directed the documentary The Mountain Runners, which is about the Mount Baker Marathon, famous and infamous series of races in the early part of the 20th century. And the work that I'd done with Todd led me to understand that if I was going to work on a book about Mount Baker, he was the guy I wanted. So thanks to his connections in the community, we were able to access thousands and thousands of amazing photographs. And as we got to work on the project, I more and more came to understand the great value that these Arcadia books have, in that they create an opportunity for us to coalesce these diverse collections of photos in one place. Some of these photos were basically stored in trunks under people's beds and stashed away in closets, and some of these folks were not getting any younger. So the opportunity to collect these all together and create what we hope is a coherent, certainly not an exhaustive, but a coherent history of the mountain is a project that we're both found very satisfying. This is one of the photos we did purchase. Just had to have this one. This is Joe Morovitz, and the history of the mountain is full of what we call colorful characters, and I don't think the colors get any richer than when talking about Iron Joe. He was a miner on the south side of the mountain, and he was famous for incredible feats of strength, as well as for riding goat skins on sawhorses. Yeah, that's not a real goat, folks. But one of the stories that really struck us about Joe was that as a miner, he ordered a piece of ore crushing equipment and had it delivered to concrete. And the problem was that it weighed 2,300 pounds, and his mine was 21 miles away. So he came down to concrete with a team of horses with the idea that they would pull this thing back to his cabin, and they couldn't do it. So, not to be deterred, Joe winched it from tree to tree. Took him how long?
2 years.
2 years. Yeah, 2 years of effort. So, yeah. Some of the images in the book come to us from a pair of photographers who are pretty well known, at least locally. This is one of them, Darius Kinsey. He is famous for his images of the early days of the timber industry specifically. He and his wife traveled around. He did the shooting, and his wife did the hard work, the darkroom work. But produced some beautiful images. Many of them found their way into the book. And this fellow is Bert Huntoon. And Bert Huntoon was, the more we learned about Bert, the more impressed we were. A true Renaissance man. He was an engineer and a surveyor, and he was just a super enthusiastic booster of various civic projects. He's largely instrumental for the existence of Chuckanut Drive, for example, and was one of the main motivators for the construction of the Mount Baker Lodge. But in addition to that, he was a wonderful nature photographer. And he was a nature photographer in the mountains at a time where appreciating the mountain for its aesthetic charms wasn't really the main idea. And Bert influenced a lot of business leaders that Mount Baker had a value that transcended mere economics with his beautiful photos.
So what John and I did is we pulled together sort of a cultural history of the mountain. So each chapter, as the book progresses, goes through some steps of different ages and different activities on the mountain. So we're not really giving a historic overview of tonight with a PowerPoint program, but what we're doing is giving you a sampling of the chapters through the book. So we start out, of course, with the discovery of the first first white men to see the mountain. And actually, prior to this is, of course, 1792 with the discovery in the Chatham, when they came into Puget Sound and saw the mountain for the first time and named it, was named after the third officer. But I also want to put into perspective that actually 2 years prior to this, it was Manuel Quimper that actually saw the mountain for the first time, and they named it, and then the British came along, and because of such a long period of these guys were on the water before the information got back to Europe that this area has been charted, it turned out that George Vancouver got back there first and therefore won the laurels of naming the area, of course. This image, I just want to say, is a Steve Mayo painting. So, he's a very famous local artist, and he did a wonderful job depicting the discovery and the Chatham coming into the Sound.
Yeah, it's worth mentioning, of course, that these guys didn't actually discover the mountain. Mm-hmm. The Coast Salish people lived in its shadow for 10,000 years. One of the main issues we had in finding material for the book was dealing with pre-European history. Very difficult to find images. It's a whole nother book, really.
And so we kind of jump ahead to the first real exploration of the area. As you can imagine, Roeder and Peabody comes in and they set up their mill. They're looking at the area for the profits that they can obtain. Lumber was a massive industry. But at the same time, we have a gentleman, Edmund Coleman, that comes from England, settles in Victoria, and he's looking out, and he can see Mount Baker from out there. And as a climber, his dream is to climb Mount Baker. So after 2 failed attempts, he manages to start from Bellingham on a 10-day journey to the summit. So besides the actual first person on the summit's concerned, that's one element of the story, but when we were putting this together, the 2 things that stood out to me was simply, 1, 10 days. Can you imagine that at that time with a forest with a canopy cover so thick that it's dark, and these guys, with whatever equipment that they can carry on their own, 10 days that it's taken them to reach that. I mean, and you're not even seeing the mountain until you can break the cover. To me, that's just an incredible journey that's overlooked. I mean, in my mind, it ranks like a trip up the Amazon. I mean, these guys had no idea what they were getting themselves into. And the other thing that stand out for me was the fact that if you were to go back to the old Collier's magazine articles of this, he was an artist and he did all his own sketchings of the journey. And to me, those are the 2 aspects that we kind of overlook, is distance for that time period when we can jump in a car and we're there in a couple hours, or the fact that, he was able to record this. They're just marvelous images.
Yeah, here's his image of the crux of the climb. If anyone's ever done it, this is called the Roman Wall. If you come up what is now known as the Coleman Glacier route, and it is the climb up that route is not really very technical. The hardest part of it is this one little stretch where it gets a little steeper, but it's not this steep, folks. There wouldn't be a lot of people getting to the top of Mount Baker if it really looked like this. So yeah, he was a great artist and apparently quite imaginative as well.
So nobody again is setting foot on the mountain until we reach a time of 1884 when Victor Lowell is prospecting with 4 other friends on the south side of the mountain. A couple of them decide to take off and do some goat hunting. And Victor is like looking at the mountain and saying to himself, I'm going to make the second trip up. So he and the other 2 men head up there. Well, it turns out that they ended up going onto the south summit, which is about, if I recall, about 700 feet lower, the Sherman Peak. So he made it to a summit, but the wrong summit. And he realized that it was late in the day. He wasn't going to make it to what's referred to as Grant Peak, the highest point. And I think that this may have gnawed on him a little bit, because it wasn't until 1891 that he decided to make another attempt at it. There were other attempts in the meantime. And so Victor Lowell in 1891 makes the second summit, but what's unique is this is the very first photograph taken on the summit. And there's some just cool imageries. When that was up there, you had the guy there with the 6-shooter and the axe. And
yeah, nice ice axe.
Yeah, nice ice axe. And, it looks like they just looked and saw what was in the garage and what they might need.
Yeah. Well, things heated up around Mount Baker when gold was discovered. The Mount Baker Gold Rush, as gold rushes everywhere go, created more heat than light. Thousands of hopeful miners flooded the area. Of course, very few of them actually made any money at all. Most left empty-handed. But it was basically a scenario where the folks who supplied the miners with supplies did okay. And some of the towns that exist around the mountain today were formed to supply these miners. This is the Lone Jack mine. It's up near Twin Lakes. Was one of the most successful of the mines. They produced $500,000 between 1897 and 1907. This one is called the Boundary Red, and this is up on Mount Larrabee, which is above Twin Lakes, about a half a mile from the Canadian border. And this mine, like many of the other high elevation mines, was plagued with the problem of winter avalanches, which routinely swept down and damaged or destroyed buildings, and they'd have to be repaired or rebuilt in the spring, and no money was coming out of it. It was sort of discouraging, actually. And the Boundary Red did okay, though, because due to its position, they were able to transport supplies in and the gold out through Canada, which was a lot easier. But at one point, the Canadian government had second thoughts about that, and that largely spelled the end of the good times at the Boundary Red. This guy is Ed Bell, quite another one of those colorful characters. His horse on the right there is Sheba, and he was a famous packer who was notable for being able to get anything you wanted gotten up to one of the mines. He was the guy you called, and in this case, he's got an iron stove. And he entered into a wager saying that Sheba could get that stove up to the mine. It was, I don't know how far it was, but excruciating elevation gain. And it was roundly agreed that no horse could carry that much weight for that long without a break. So he was crafty, and when he got out of sight, he stopped, and on the other horse he had a tripod. And he would stop both horses, set the tripod up over Sheba, and winch up the stove, give Sheba a break. And then after a while, put the stove back down, and sure enough, they got the stove up to the mine, and Ed collected on the wager. I personally think Sheba should have gotten a cut. These are the Gargett brothers. Their mine was way up high on what was then called Red Mountain, what we now call Mount Larrabee. Again, just incredible perseverance, just the business of living daily life, eating food and being able to get supplies in, just an incredibly difficult task. These guys worked for years and years and years and actually never really found anything. However, in the 60s, something was found. There was a Boy Scout troop out on a hike, and they happened to come upon what was called the Lulu Shaft, an abandoned mine shaft, and they were poking around in the shaft and came upon this. And what this is many, many cases of dynamite. Yeah, luckily there was no rubbing of sticks together at this interlude. And what they did was they informed the scoutmaster, who informed the ranger, who informed the Naval Air Station at Whidbey Island, and they came up with the intention of detonating all this dynamite, which attracted quite a crowd from Bellingham. Even then, people love to watch stuff blow up. But the dynamite had been sitting in that wet cave for so long that it sort of just, rather than explode, and it was a little bit of a letdown.
So the timber industry, I always wish that I knew more about it so I can convey it better. But as you know, Roeder and Peabody are the first ones coming in, and they see a wonderful riches right here for the grabbing. And that mentality held true for almost 100 years of virgin timber that could be harvested. And as slowly we move back out of Bellingham and into the county and towards the mountain, of course, distances are getting much more further out for bringing in either full timber or shakes or cut timber. This is a great image. There's many great images to choose from for the lumber industry here. Darius Kinsey just had thousands to choose from. This is a great early one, of course, when oxen were being used. There's a couple of images within the photo here that are worth taking note. The road that the oxen are coming down with the skids going across, Skid Row, harvests its name from the timber industry here. There's a guy in the back, you really can't see him, but he has a bucket of grease and like a broom, and he's greasing down the road, greasing down the skid so it's easier for the oxen to pull the logs out of the forest. But you can see that, earlier on, they
called him a grease monkey.
The grease monkey, yes. But, early on you can see, progression was slow, but it was escalating really fast. So you're looking at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 oxen here to move one tree. So you can understand why in the very beginning of the logging, the first couple of decades in the Northwest, where loggers would say all the time that there's no ending to this. This will last forever. Well, technology didn't catch up to them to make it go by faster. This image here was taken out in Wickersham at the Forbes Lumber Company, as I remember right. Innovations coming along here. We have a steam donkey, rather large one, really. It too is on, like John can point out, there's some a large skid there. And they would anchor it, to the ground, run its steel cables out, and able to hoist and move timber around. The steam donkey obviously was able to haul down logs from very steep inclines where before it was much harder to get at, kind of improved getting into different areas and moving the timber faster. And in time, as the town of Glacier is getting established, from the Bellingham Bay Improvement Company and the logging companies here on the shores, extended a railroad going out to Glacier, the Bellingham Bay in British Columbia. The design of it was for hauling timber, coal coming out of the Polson mines out in Glacier, moving product. And with this innovation, you did not any longer need to haul your timber in from by horse or donkey, but you could just build a spur from your company out deeper into the woods. This is an example of the Chin lumber company, and this spur is claimed to have a 4,000 foot elevation. But you can just see, you just know darn well come zooming down that thing must have been crazy. But here you get kind of a transitional point, which I really like this image. You have the spur here, the train, you see the car there, which is almost hard to recognize with some logs on it. And you still have some oxen coming up, and they're like loading down, rolling off to a platform and rolling it onto the rail bed and heading down to the main line. So I think this is a real nice transitional photo showing some of the older and the newer technology that's coming. We're probably about in the mid-1890s here. This is about mid-1920s, and you can see where we jump further ahead. Now we don't need to lay tracks all around, and taking up time and added expense. They're throwing in roads. They're throwing up, they were throwing up trestles like this for the trains, but you could throw one of these up fast. The terrain you could see from this image was quite vicious to travel through. I heard some stories that I've read about how they would throw up a bridge like this in a day or two, and then the truck would come along or the train, and then everybody would get off and they would put something on the pedal or on the engine so it went across the bridge slowly just to make sure that it wasn't going to cave in, and somebody would jump on the other side and go ahead until they could trust it probably a lot better.
Who needs OSHA?
Mount Baker Marathon. Who's already heard about the Mount Baker Marathon? So we actually got a sizable amount of people here who haven't. So Mount Baker Marathon, 1911, 12, and 13. We're looking at different ways in town here to exploit the mountain, and a lot of people in Bellingham, Whatcom County, especially the Chamber of Commerce, is looking, as the papers said at the time, with envious eyes at Mount Rainier that became a national park in 1899, and something new that they saw that they never saw before: tourism. These little towns were busting with hotels, and with that, tourism coming up from all parts of the country, and with that, of course, a lot of money. So the thought is if Mount Rainier can be a national park, well, Mount Baker could be one too. And it's much closer. It's easier to get at. There was a road up there already. And so the idea is one of the first things was the Mount Baker Club was formed. They hooked up with the Chamber of Commerce and started this crazy race. So in 1911, you had a choice of two trails: the Deming Trail out of Deming, off the Mosquito Lake Road, if you know the area, the Glacier Trail out of the town of Glacier, one of the furthest on towns to the foot of the mountain. And you had a choice in Bellingham of taking either the train out to Glacier for the contestants, or a stripped-down automobile to Deming. And either trail, it was about an hour to get to either one, but on the trail, you were running at night, is when they started, 11 o'clock at night. And the Deming Trail would have been 32 miles round trip and 28 miles round trip if you took the Glacier. And they all did this for the first one to the summit and back to Bellingham would receive $100. Following year would go up to $500, which is big money back then. So on this image here, we have the Deming Trail, and here is the Glacier Trail, and either side would converge at the saddle and then to the summit. This is one of the cars, the Betsy. Betsy is being test driven in 1911 to see how it would fare in the mud, because the roads were very, very muddy. You had a combination of really rutted roads out in the county. I mean, not a lot of people out there had cars. and very rutted, and for a distance anyways, leaving Bellingham, you had a plank road that wasn't in the best of condition.
And how fast were these guys going?
They would strip down the cars, and they swear that they could get up to 60, 65 miles an hour on these things, which is just like insane, especially if you're trying to do this at night. They had extended lights in the second and third years. They were approaching the same speeds with the train. By all means, it was a crazy race, and it ended in the third year in disaster. I mean, somebody fell in a crevasse. Nobody was happy with the race. It was beginning to be noted as human horse races in the newspapers. Here we have Harvey Haggard coming down off the race on the first year. He ran 2 years, won the second year. And for those who know the story and those who don't, Harvey comes running off the Glacier Trail, 28 miles round trip, a hard night. He is beat, he's wiped, he jumps onto the train. It's chugging along, heading back to Bellingham, gets outside of Maple Falls.
Yeah, you got to say this part too. He strips down for a massage. It seemed like a good idea at the time, I guess. So he's naked when this next thing happens.
And the train goes rounding a bend next to the Loop Farm, and here is a 1,800-pound Red Bull on the tracks, and takes the train off the tracks. Fortunately, there's just some cuts and bruises. Harvey is given a robe and throws his clothes back on as best as he could. A carriage comes along, sees if anybody was hurt, and they say Harvey's got to get to town. They throw him on the carriage. This is a typical Pearls of Pauline now. You know, they jump on the phone here, connect it to the telegraph wire to Maple Falls, tell them that they need a saddle horse ready, because this stretch of road there was just so horrendous that they claimed that it would bust the back of any car that tried to navigate it, and that's why the train was there. So the nearest train was Kendall Crossing. The nearest car was Kendall Crossing. So they get Harvey to Maple Falls, throw him onto a saddle horse who takes him to Kendall Crossing, jump him into a car from there, and whiz him into town, and he comes in second. Loses out by, I believe, 32 minutes I think it was, and Joe Galbraith of Acme is the winner at 12 hours, 36 minutes, round trip. 2 hours of that is taken up by the transportation element. So that's incredible speed. And there's Joe coming into town to collect his trophy and his $100 prize. And of course, they did not, it was really nice, back then they were really thinking ahead, thinking green, I guess, or, don't let anything go to waste. So Deming has out at the I think it's the logging grounds today, they decide to bring in what's left of the bowl and barbecue him. Actually, a few weeks later, there was a big dispute in the paper, and I wish I had this when I was working on the book and the film for this. There was actually a dispute weeks later on where Glacier blamed Deming for stealing the bull when the barbecue should and right have happened in Glacier.
The Mount Baker Lodge, a lot of folks today have no idea that up in Heather Meadows, there was just a beautiful, beautiful structure. The construction was started in 1923, and as I said earlier, Bert Huntoon was instrumental in rallying the local business community to finance construction. It opened finally in 1927, and it was modeled after European alpine lodges. Originally, they were talking about making the lodge out of basalt, which is this rock here, of which there's a lot in that area, but they decided eventually to make it out of wood from nearby forests that were under the ownership of the lodge company. You can see this beautiful 70-foot observation tower that was sort of its claim to fame, a very popular place for guests at the lodge to watch the sun go down. And if you've been up in Heather Meadows, you know how beautiful the view is there. So they got to see a lot of alpenglow on Mount Shuckson, no doubt. And here's the main lobby, done on a truly grand scale, sort of a native motif. The fireplace at the end of the lobby was such that they could put 10-foot lengths of log directly into it. And they served guest dinner. They had bands and orchestras play here, and it was really quite the place for a social engagement at the time. One of the attractions of the lodge was its existence in what was seen as sort of howling wilderness at the time, and it attracted urban dwellers as at this time the Pacific Northwest was becoming urbanized, and there was a chance for people to sort of get out in the wilderness and commune with nature, including doing so in ways that maybe weren't completely smart. Yeah, and then on August 5th, 1931, the dream of the lodge literally went up in smoke. A fire was reported just before dawn, and very quickly engulfed the building. And luckily, there were only 27 guests in the lodge at the time, and as the fire spread, there was a 1,900-gallon oil tank there which caught fire and exploded, sending flames 1,000 feet into the air. So this was sort of an epic event. Interestingly, Bert Huntoon was staying at the lodge, but he was out taking pictures of the sunrise and got back to find that the lodge that he so loved was no longer there. At a certain period in time, the stories, everybody's read Jack London, right? We're familiar with Call of the Wild and et cetera. In the 1920s, Jack London sort of sparked a little bit of a literary trend of these adventure stories set in the far north. In Hollywood at the time, the idea of actually going to Alaska and bringing a crew to Alaska was an arduous and expensive undertaking. So they were looking for something that looked like Alaska, but was a little easier to get to. And they found that at Mount Baker. This is the set of a 1927 film called Wolf Fangs, starring Carol Lincoln. Everybody's heard of Carol Lincoln, right? But this was the first film made up in Heather Meadows, and typical of the genre. She portrayed a woman in the wilderness. She was a sheep herder and countering wild animals and all sorts of difficulties and emerging victorious in the end. These folks you might have heard of. This was the filming, actually, of Call of the Wild. It was filmed in the winter of 1934 and 1935. Of course, we have Clark Gable, Loretta Young, Reginald Owen were the stars. So this was marquee stuff. These were big, big names. These were the biggest names in the movies of the day. And the idea of filming in the winter up at Mount Baker was pretty groundbreaking. The road had never been kept open in the winter. When it started to snow, they just let everything shut down and things got quiet. But when Clark Gable's on the mountain, we're going to keep that road open. And they tried very hard, and for the most part, they succeeded, but at one point, a huge storm blew in, and for 2 weeks, it just snowed and snowed and snowed, and there was no way to keep the road open, so the road closed. The stars and the cast and the crew were all stranded up there, and they actually used prop dog sleds from the film to go down a glacier to get food. And there was all sorts of other difficulties. The equipment froze, the heating. At this point, the lodge had burned, but there was another building called the Annex that had been a sort of an addition onto the lodge. It was still there, which is where they stayed. And the heating didn't work very well. Everybody was cold, except that Clark and Loretta found alternative means of keeping warm, which actually resulted in the birth of a daughter 9 months later. And due to the morality clause of the time, the paternity of the baby was denied until she was an adult, and she didn't learn until she was a grown woman that her dad was Clark Gable. Here's another scene from the filming of that movie. This is down along the Nooksack River near the cross-country ski area of Salmon Ridge now. The director of the film, William Wellman, is here. You can tell, as they helpfully point out in the caption, by his white socks. And after that, in 1937, Hollywood came back. Same sort of scenario. They wanted a story set in the Yukon, and so they brought The Barrier, which had been a very popular story by Rex Beach, and the production crew there in the summer. And I really like the blurb that they used here where it says, "In the midst of the mad vortex of greedy humanity, a slip of a girl strikes out for romance and finds herself up against the strongest barrier ever created by man." So that's quite a come on. Interestingly, this guy, Leo Carrillo, anyone remember the old TV show Cisco Kid? Yeah, right? So you know him from that. Yep. And here you have the stars of the film. James Ellison, the handsome leading man there, Gene Parker, the heroine, and there's Leo. And they basically they didn't reconstruct, they constructed out of whole cloth what was supposed to be the village of Flambeau in the Yukon. I think that's such a great name for a little town in the Yukon, Flambeau. And you can see Mount Shuksan here in the background, right? This is a recognizable scene. And this film was done in the summer, so it was quite an attraction for the people of Bellingham, many of whom came up and managed to weasel their way into roles as extras. And it was good for the economy. The economy was pretty depressed at this time, and these were paying jobs. Some of those locals were then thrilled to be able to see themselves on the silver screen at the premiere down at the Mount Baker Theater. And everybody asks about this. I think the Mount Baker Theater needs to put this log back in there.
So Boots on the Mountain. So this part of the book, we talk about some of the trails and how the mountain was received by the tourist industry as it came in. This here is an image outside of, probably at the beginning of the trailhead in Glacier. And, today we drive all the way up to Heliotrope or up the Skyline, or up to Artist Point to start our hike. But at this time, you could take a train right into Glacier, and from that point on is where you're going to start your hike. So you can imagine much more of a longer hike than back then than it would be today. And I just like looking at these old photos with the makeshift bridges. You know darn well the runoffs is going to just tear that to pieces, and they're going to have to go back in there every year and rework the trail. This is just I think just a lovely portrayal of the early hiking on that time. And they took it just as serious, as today. They got their sticks and everything in their little pack. The guy's holding a bag there on his shoulder. And then we have what I refer to as siege climbing. So early into the century, we have the Mazama Club out of Portland forms a mountain hiking club. I believe it was the second large hiking and climbing club in the country. The first one was in the Appalachians much earlier. And this is a great example of happens to be the Mountaineers out of Seattle, making one of their trips up. And they would come up in the summer. The Mazamas liked a place called Mazama Park, which is over by the
Railroad Grade.
Railroad Grade. And so they would establish that area, is there for like 4 weeks. They would just do their camping, and they would do whatever they do around there, as many 100 at a time, and they would climb and they would just converse with nature. The interesting thing is when you're reading the newspapers at the time when they're doing the climbs, you find out, I don't know if you really can tell from the photo, but it's usually pretty much even 50-50 women and men. And women are climbing the mountain. There just seems to be no competition between male and female when it came to the mountain. I mean, that's the image that I get. In some cases, I actually found a couple of climbs where there was 3/4 women and just 1/4 men on the trip. So it's pretty amazing. The gentleman on the right here, holding his shoulder, his hand on the other guy's shoulders, that's the former and founding president of the Vancouver Hiking Club up in British Columbia, and his name was Bishop, J.C. Bishop. And this photo was probably taken about 1912, 1913. That's Clayton Wright on the left. Clayton was a farmer and owned a dairy condenser out in the county, and he was also very well known as a guide on the mountain. He was very good and well known, and a lot of people hired him. He was actually in the 1911 marathon race. And so during 12 and 13 of that year, the club wanted to have, the Mount Baker Club wanted to have some images taken of the mountain. And of course, Bishop just loved the mountain, and he volunteered, he was retired from his position and wanted to take the photos. So he made 3 ascents up the mountain. The first one, his camera was not working right and he didn't get the images. The second time he went up, it was so cloudy and snowed in that he wasn't able to get his images. So on his 3rd trip up with Wright, it was a glorious, beautiful day, got his photos, and on the way back, Bishop just disappears. You know, Wright is just talking to him, and next thing you know, he's gone. And he fell into a crevasse and dropped about 40 feet. What's significant about that is that, especially he being a career mountaineer, climber himself, he's actually the first casualty on the mountain, from the mountain. There was a gentleman in 1891 by the name of Dick Smith who was actually killed on the Bastille Ridge, but the mountains didn't kill him. He kind of was foolishly using his rifle as a hiking stick, and it discharged, and so that does not make him officially
it makes him officially something.
Not demised by the mountain itself. So Bishop is retrieved, and the people of Glacier really go out of their way to clean him up and put some nice clothes. So they figure anybody with the distinction that he had for the community of British Columbia that should go back looking like he came back from royalty, but fallen royalty. This is a great image of the Mazama Park, of one of the cabins that were outfitted and used by a lot of climbers. And it slips my mind. I did know what year that they burned it down, but I can't remember now. Do you, John? Okay.
60s, I think.
Yeah. And here, I'll let you finish up with this one.
Yeah, this is a memorial commemorating the worst mountaineering accident on Mount Baker in 1939. It was traditional at that time for the graduating class of the local college, what is now Western Washington University, to go up in the summer and climb the mountain in big groups. And on this particular July day, it was unseasonably hot. The temperature was in the 90s up high, and this group of students was almost to the very top. They were on the Roman wall when the cornice broke off and a glacier or a avalanche swept down and carried them all down the mountain, 6 of whom were killed. And of course, what we now think of when we think of the mountain oftentimes is the ski area and the skiing industry. Here's an early innovation. This was called the ski escalator, and it was introduced in 1935 by Arthur Brandlin, who was a local logger, and he hooked this up to a steam donkey from a logging operation, and via the cable, he would haul 30 passengers up 900 feet vertically to the top of Panorama Dome, charging 25 cents a pop to do it. And it was an immediate sensation. People just loved this. But unfortunately, after less than a month of operation, Mr. Brandlin was readying the ski escalator for operation one morning, and another avalanche came down, and that was the end of both the escalator and Arthur Brandlin. Snowshoeing, of course, something that now we think of as a recreational activity. It was enjoyed recreationally back then, but it was also a practical means of getting around. This is a beautiful image that comes from the Galen Byrie collection, and the original is hand-tinted, and it's just stunning. To work in the book, we needed render it in black and white, but a very beautiful picture. You can see the face of Shuckson in the distance there. And here's a legend, Franz Gabel. Franz Gabel was an Austrian, he's just kind of an amazing athlete. He was a skier, and he was actually taken prisoner during World War II by the Russians and escaped from a prisoner of war camp and made his way across the Alps in winter alone with virtually no gear or supplies, and then went on to become a Olympic medalist for Austria. He relocated to Washington and immediately began to see the incredible potential of skiing at Mount Baker. And he started both a ski shop and the ski school. The sign here refers to that, of course. Thousands and thousands of young skiers learned how to do their thing thanks to Franz, and he was also instrumental in recreating the Mount Baker Marathon in a more sane and reasonable form when ski to sea was reintroduced in, what was that, 1971? 73. Getting away from the sane stuff for a minute, this was called the Slush Cup, and this was a tradition that existed for 30 years, where on the 4th of July there would be a competition where mostly popular with younger folks, I imagine, where they would come barreling down this hill and try to ski across this meltwater tarn. And it evolved. It got just crazier and crazier over the years. People came down on riding toilets, and I suspect alcohol may have been involved. Finally, I think the Sheriff's Department put an end to this in the 70s. And more recently, Mount Baker was one of the birthplaces of snowboarding in the United States at a time in the 80s where snowboarders were seen as unwelcome ruffians at most ski areas. The Mount Baker ski area embraced them and really cultivated this new sport. They started running a snowboarding event called the Legendary Banked Slalom in 1985, and it continues to run to this day. It's the longest continuously running snowboard competition in the world. Here is an Olympic gold medalist, Maëlle Ricker. She won the slalom 7 times. And this is kind of interesting. You see the trophy. This is what you get when you win, a roll of duct tape. And this heart, yeah, they're not in it for the money, folks. This harkens back to the early days of snowboarding before there were really bindings. And what they would do is they would literally duct tape their boots to the boards. I don't think OSHA would have liked that very much either. And all of that led to what is a very vibrant and, in fact, ever-growing tradition here in Whatcom County, the Ski to Sea race. Every Memorial Day, we have this incredible community celebration that sort of harkens back to the Mount Baker Marathon without the risk of death, and it's a relay race, right? Not one guy going the whole distance, but becoming increasingly popular around the world. Here's a beautiful photo. This is a modern photo taken by John Skurlock. Some of you may have heard of John. He's an aerial photographer par excellence. And this shows steam rising from the Sherman crater and reminding us that Mount Baker is an active volcano. In 1975 and 1976, there was significant volcanic activity around the mountain. And basically, geologists predict it's just a matter of time before that activity will return. So that's pretty much a very short synopsis of what we have in our book, and it was just such a pleasure to work on it. And as Todd says, we're not experts. We're sort of just the guys who got to compile these cool pictures and hear these great stories from the people who knew them. And we're very thankful to be able to share them with you tonight. And thanks again.